I stepped onto the polished platform of the orbital palace, the metal beneath my boots humming faintly with the energy that powered the entire station. Above me, the void stretched endlessly, punctuated by the blinking lights of distant ships and satellites that resembled fireflies in a galactic night. The advisors, all dressed in shimmering uniforms that reflected constellations I didn't recognize, whispered among themselves as if every word carried the weight of a supernova. And then she arrived. The Queen. She floated, almost effortlessly, down the steps that spiraled like a double helix toward the center of the chamber. She looked human enough at first glance, pale skin, luminous silver eyes, but her ears were long and graceful, tapering to delicate points that seemed to sense the vibrations of the room itself. My pulse did a small, rebellious jig. Apparently, mine wasn't the only heart racing. The royal guard's hands hovered over devices that could vaporize me in milliseconds, though I suspected none of them had ever been used outside of ceremonial theatrics. An advisor in a robe that looked suspiciously like a nebula leaned forward. "We should call the translator drone," he hissed, eyes darting nervously. I nodded, though I was fairly certain the drone was still halfway to another star system. The Queen's gaze swept over the room with an elegance that made the hairs on my neck feel self-conscious. Her voice, when it finally cut through the silence, was musical and alien, like glass instruments plucked in zero gravity. The advisors panicked visibly, fluttering papers and gesturing wildly. The suggestion of a translator was repeated with increasing urgency, though I noticed one thing: no one actually knew where the translator would appear or if it would even speak the same dialect she used. I swallowed. Then, for reasons that probably defied any sane diplomatic training, I cleared my throat and began to speak in her language. The effect was immediate. A glass levitated from the table, spun gently in midair, and fell with a shattering crash. The Queen froze. Her silver eyes widened, as if she were witnessing a ghost performing physics experiments in real time. The court held its collective breath. A translator drone from 3 star systems away would have arrived too late anyway, and apparently, I had just broken some cosmic etiquette. I tried to recover. Do I need subtitles for that?" I said, forcing a grin that probably looked more like a nervous twitch. The Queen's lips twitched. Something between amusement and disbelief. And for the first time, I realized I might have just turned a potentially catastrophic first contact into an experiment in interstellar improv comedy. The silence stretched like a solar flare frozen in time. The Queen's silver eyes never blinked, they traced my every move as if I were a hologram she hadn't quite decided to turn off. Around us, the court shifted uneasily, advisors whispering frantic calculations into floating communicators while a few younger nobles fidgeted with grav pens that hovered midair, making tiny loops like metallic insects. I cleared my throat again, but my words felt suddenly inadequate, as if speaking the first tongue made everything I had rehearsed on the shuttle sound like a cosmic knock-knock joke told to a black hole. Finally, the Queen leaned forward, her long ears tilting slightly, catching something I couldn't hear. "You," she said, her voice still musical but sharper now, "speak the first tongue." The words echoed faintly, and the chamber seemed to hum in response, like an old engine waking from centuries of rest. The advisors gasped in unison, their panic oscillating somewhere between alarm and awe. One elderly scholar clutched his robes and muttered something about historical anomalies, before collapsing dramatically onto a hoverchair. A grav drone buzzed in tight spirals overhead, almost as if it were trying to contain the collective tension. I rubbed the back of my neck, suddenly aware that I might have just flung open a door that no human had ever been allowed to touch. The Queen's gaze softened, just a fraction, and then curiosity bloomed in her eyes. She asked me questions, rapid fire in the first tongue, and I answered carefully, sprinkling in the few idioms I had painstakingly learned. Then came the moment I couldn't resist, a ceremonial greeting, rendered literally. It translated to, "May your reign be long and your enemies trip over their own feet." I expected shock. I expected outrage. Instead, her lips curved in what could only be described as laughter, the kind that ripples through the room and makes gravity itself seem a little unsure. The advisors froze, mortified, while younger nobles exchanged glances that said, "Did that just happen?" Encouraged, I ventured further, offering tiny jokes embedded in the ancient proverbs I had memorized. The queen leaned back in her throne, tilting her long ears with amusement, while the court teetered between scandalized horror and reluctant giggles. It was absurd, and yet somehow, this absurdity was opening a door that formal diplomacy never could. As she studied me, I realized we had stumbled into something rare, trust born not of protocol or treaties, but of shared laughter in a language older than most empires. The first cracks in centuries of royal rigidity had formed, and for once, I wasn't terrified. I was delighted. By the time the final council meeting began, the tension had dissolved into something unrecognizable. The Queen's court still hovered in the orbiting palace like a swarm of careful satellites, but now, instead of suspicion, their attention was bright with curiosity and cautious amusement. I found myself laughing along with her at a proverb I had translated too literally, one that claimed, "Even a star fears a sneeze in the wrong direction." The advisors muttered under their breath, clearly unsure whether to correct me or shield their dignity. The Queen tilted her long ears toward me, a gesture that had become the closest thing to a smile in her species' subtle language, and I realized I felt a warmth I hadn't anticipated: connection. Diplomacy had shifted from protocol to improvisation. Every ceremonial phrase I spoke sparked tiny eruptions of laughter, each joke bridging a centuries-old divide. She asked questions no translator could ever render, about humanity's quirks, our impulsive humor, and the way we treated mistakes as lessons rather than crimes. And I answered, cautiously, then boldly, realizing that the first tongue didn't just communicate words, it carried the weight of memory, of identity, of forgotten laughter. Her silver eyes glimmered with recognition, her people had not heard such openness in millennia, and I had unwittingly become the conduit. When the meeting concluded, the Queen rose. The gravity of her movement seemed to ripple through the chamber, yet her presence was lighter than before. She announced that humanity would not merely be allies in trade or politics, they would be keepers of the old voices, the first interpreters of the language she had long thought silenced. Advisors scrambled to adjust records, but she simply watched, long ears brushing lightly against the air, her gaze settled on me. "You will return," she said softly. "Not as diplomat or envoy, but as storyteller. It has been 9,000 years since the first tongue carried laughter across these halls." I swallowed, my mind spinning. I had come expecting tension, protocol, possibly disaster. Instead, I had discovered a strange power, that humor, patience, and courage could remake even the oldest walls of fear. As I departed the orbital palace, floating through corridors that glimmered with energy streams and data conduits, I felt different. No longer just a visitor, I had become a bridge between worlds, a witness to the living memory of a civilization, and a teller of jokes that could travel light years. Somewhere, the Queen's laughter echoed, threading through the void, and I knew that the universe, vast, complex, and often intimidating, was also capable of warmth, and that I had learned to navigate it with courage and a well-timed punchline.